Hello, and welcome to Stowe Talks, a podcast designed to support people going through a relationship breakdown and all of the challenges this brings. I'm Matthew Taylor.
And I'm Liza Gatchell, family lawyers at Stowe Family Law. And today we are delighted to welcome back to the podcast Dr Supriya McKenna, a leading expert in the field of narcissistic relationships, to explore how you prepare for and leave a narcissist. Dr Supriya McKenna is one of the best known names in the field of narcissism and is an Amazon best-selling author on the subject of how narcissists behave in divorce. She started out as a medical doctor and trained as a GP. Recognising a huge need for education in UK family lawyers, in 2020, Supriya conceived the groundbreaking guide, Narcissism and Family Law, a Practitioner's Guide, which she wrote in parallel with UK solicitor Karen Walker. That book remains the only book for family lawyers on the subject of narcissism. Supriya has trained thousands of family law professionals in narcissistic personality disorder. She works directly with those who have fallen victim to narcissistic abuse and produces and hosts the top 5% podcast Narcissists in Divorce, The Narcissist Trap.
So regular listeners and viewers will be very familiar with Supriya, who is the current record holder for guest appearances on the podcast. This is a second episode in a row featuring Supriya, who's been kind enough to join us for yet more brilliant content this series. So last week in the feed, we have her episode on Are You in a Relationship with a Narcissist? There's previous episodes in the feed for anyone who's not listened to or watched Supriya before. Talk to us about divorcing or separating from a narcissist, rebuilding life after narcissistic abuse, and parenting alongside a narcissistic ex-partner, which was so chock full of information that that's a 2-part episode. So thanks for joining us today, Supriya.
Thank you very much for having me again.
Always a pleasure. Let's get stuck into it then. I know there's a few areas that we're going to cover today, but, someone has perhaps listened to last week's podcast, read your books, done the questionnaire and all of that good stuff, and has decided, I'm in a relationship with a narcissist and I need to leave. How do you, what are the first steps that someone wants to think about? Because it's not like leaving a normal, in quote unquote, relationship, is it?
No, exactly. And I mean, we've gone into why, I think, at length in the other podcasts. But certainly, I mean, if people haven't listened to those or people who aren't fully aware, they're going to get a real sense, I think, from this podcast. Because when we talk about all the preparations you need to make, there are so many, unfortunately. And the worst thing about this is that you're not really in the emotional state to be able to do this in the kind of, you can't just quickly do these things. There's a lot to do. Because if you don't do them, actually, you're going to really experience the full force of their behaviours, and you're not really going to be able to cope with them in the way that you need to be able to, because your brain needs to be functioning to the best that it can be. And the narcissist is going to take advantage of the fact that you are seriously traumatized by this whole experience. And when you're traumatized, when you go into the fight, flight, freeze or fawn response, the blood flow is diverted away from your brain, so that you can run away. It goes to your muscles, so that you can run away or do any of the things that the evolutionary kind of protective things that we're supposed to do when we're faced with danger. And so, of course, you're not thinking clearly. And unfortunately, you need to be able to think clearly. So you need to give yourself time to make these preparations. So one of the first things I always say to people is they need to build their armor, basically. They need to understand general narcissistic behaviors so that they don't take narcissism personally, so they don't take what the narcissist is going to do to them during the divorce process personally, because actually it isn't about you. They would do this to anyone. They wouldn't do. It's not like if they had another partner, they'd be any different towards them. It would be exactly the same. So also, if you understand narcissistic behaviors, you're not going to be wasting time or energy during your divorce trying to make sense of them. If you just know that they do these things because they're narcissists, that's kind of all you need to know. You don't want to be using that precious energy, especially your brain energy, trying to sort of work out things that you don't need to work out. And also a massive thing is that narcissists gaslight massively, and that goes up during the divorce. So gaslighting is where they alter your perception of reality, essentially, so that you can't trust yourself anymore. So you can't trust your memory, you can't trust your feelings, you can't trust your perceptions. And it's really, really important to to sort of have in your mind, well, everything that the narcissist is going to say to me could be a lie, could be trying to get me to see things differently, could be trying to get me to alter my reality, everything they say, no matter how convincingly. So we need to go to couples therapy because you have to give me another chance. We need to go to mediation. We don't need lawyers to sort this out. Your lawyer's rubbish. You need to sack them. You're going to lose. Everybody says so. My lawyer, who's amazing, says so. All of those things are just gaslighting. And you need to understand what gaslighting is. You need to know what you're looking at. So just quickly, some of the examples of their behaviours: low empathy, inability to care about people. They've got that sense of entitlement, which means they'll want everything, the house, mortgage free, the children 100% of the time. That need for attention, drama, conflict, the need to scare you, invalidating you, inability to see you as good, a blend of good and bad. Obviously, gaslighting, as I've said, being manipulative. That just ramps up massively. The manipulation is shocking in divorce. You cannot believe that they can just do this without even thinking about it. It's just so natural. Unbelievable. Triangulation, that, as I say, I've mentioned couples therapy, but mediation. Mediation is a wonderful way to triangulate. You get a third person in a dynamic, really just to mess things up and cause more drama and more chaos. So there'll be narcissistic rage, there'll be aggression, they'll stonewall you and stonewall your lawyer, so they'll completely ignore your communications. They'll give you explanations for things which make no sense at all, and they'll be contradictory and accusatory in their kind of correspondence with you and your lawyer. They'll use a thing called narcissistic pseudo-logic, where nothing makes any sense. You're just thinking, but you've just said this and you've said it means this, but it doesn't. Well, don't waste time thinking about it. Label it. That's pseudo-logic. You've got to be able to label these behaviours. You've got to be able to label the letters that are coming through, looking at what the other solicitor is writing and recognising that the other solicitor is probably copying and pasting the narcissist communications, because that's what they've been instructed to do. So they often end up having to do that. And so don't take that personally. Again, don't take it personally. The other lawyer is probably not a narcissist. They might be, but they're probably not. They're probably just copying and pasting. There's a lot of things that you really have to get really familiar with when it comes to the narcissist behaviours. You've really got to understand what they do and why. So that's a huge one. So that's going to take a bit of time if you haven't already sort of worked out. That can take a lot of time, months, to really get to grips with it. And just, you'll be immersing yourself in YouTube videos and books and podcasts and all sorts. But really, you do need to do that. One of the other things I wanted to talk about is hoovering. Have you guys heard of hoovering?
I haven't heard of that term, actually. I don't know if Matt has.
Okay.
No, it's a new one onto me. So although I'm now glancing around the floor around me and thinking that I could do with a bit of that in my flat myself.
If only it were to do with domestic chores, but unfortunately not. So you're probably aware that it takes, on average, the statistics from America anyway, are that it takes on average 7 attempts to leave an abusive relationship.
Yeah.
It also applies to narcissistic relationships. And actually, I always ask my clients, how many times have you tried this before? And usually we're kind of in that ballpark. They tried to leave and then been sucked back in. So the hoovering refers to them being sucked back into the relationship.
And can you explain a bit about how that works in Supriya? Because I think to anyone who, you hear about it all the time, when people have been in abusive relationships and they say, well, why didn't you just leave? And we know it's a lot harder than that. But in a narcissistic relationship, I mean, we've talked about this previously, it's got a very specific kind of angle to it. So how does that hoovering actually tend to work in practice?
So in hoovering, basically because they don't want you to actually leave the relationship. That's the thing. I mean, occasionally the narcissist will discard you. That's when they get to the end of their tether and they realize you're not ever going to give them what they need. They'll discard you. But that's you've done a good job if they've discarded you, to be honest, because you haven't been a great source of narcissistic supply for them. That's hardly any comfort. But actually, if that's what's happened, you've probably done quite well. But most people actually end up having to leave the narcissist. And the narcissist doesn't want you to go because they need you as a source of narcissistic supply. So they will guilt trip you. How could you do this to the children? How could you do this after you said in sickness and in health, you made those vows, I'm a Catholic or whatever, I'm a Muslim, that I'm going to go to hell because of this. These are my beliefs and you've made this happen. So the guilt tripping is huge. I'm ill. The reason I've been behaving this way is because I've got depression. I mean, there's all sorts. They pull out all sorts of physical things. I've had strokes, pretend strokes. I've had. I mean, I've seen it all. I'm being investigated for cancer. I've seen it all. They will throw everything out, so they'll massively try and guilt trip you. And the doctor says it's because you're leaving me, and so you can't leave me because it's going to get worse. You're going to have a heart attack because I'm practically. Yeah, I mean, they just make all sorts of things up. So massive guilt tripping. They'll love bomb you again. So they'll turn into the perfect partner, or nearly the perfect partner. They'll put the bins out. They'll load the dishwasher the way that you like it done. They'll get your car MOT'd for you. They'll scrape the ice off your windscreen on a cold morning when they've never done anything like that for you before. So they'll turn into the perfect partner. They'll promise to change. I've realised what I did and you're right, and I'm going to go to therapy. And they're going to use therapy. If they do go to therapy, it's just a way to find out other ways to manipulate, basically. You've got to stay with me because I'm trying to change. I'm going to therapy. I'm doing my best. They'll threaten suicide. Brilliant one, that. I see that so much. If you leave, I'm going to kill myself. And they tell the children that as well. I have had a number of cases where they've told young children, I'm going to go and kill myself now because mummy wants to leave me. And it usually seems to be the men that threaten suicide, which is interesting because I would have sort of thought it was the other way. But it seems to be the men.
No, I think I'd agree with that as well. I think I've had it a few times, but it's always been from the male perspective.
I've known it, but only known men do it. I've never known.
Interesting. Isn't that because that just occurred to me as I was speaking? So I always try and balance it up by giving another gender, but then I thought I can't for suicide. I actually can't because it's.
I mean, I'm sure it does happen the other way around, but I think that's in general the feeling. And I had a couple of those fairly recently, and they're awful. It's absolutely dreadful because suddenly the life is in the hands of the other party, and sometimes in the hands of the lawyers. We get threats. Thanks for your email. I'm going to take my own life this weekend. I've had one of those very recently, which is, we sort of get used to it, but it's really deeply unpleasant. It's not uncommon and horrendous when the children that are brought into it. I've never had one actually with young children, fortunately, but adult children have been told, that's it, it's all over, and it's your mum's fault.
Yeah, and I've had it with young children where they've threatened suicide and they've literally, just left the house and gone missing for a week. And the police have been involved. And I mean, can you just, it's just horrendous, absolutely horrendous. And everyone, of course, is beside themselves because the person has completely gone off the radar, calling their work. They really, and then of course the police are involved. They find them in a holiday cottage in Cornwall or whatever, living it up. Why did you tell the police? So it's horrendous. But when they do that, it's a fairly good sign that there's something very wrong. And I think the courts tend, and certainly the police take that quite seriously and think, okay, this is domestic abuse. They seem to recognise that the suicide threats as domestic abuse. It's horrible, but it's a biggie for hoovering, and it's one of the hardest ones I think to resist. I think you just think I've got no choice. Their life's in my hands. I can't do it because of the kids or whatever. And of course, there's threats as well. If you leave me, I'm going to make things financially really uncomfortable for you. I'm going to burn the house down. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And those threats are often not empty. I'm going to accuse you of abuse. I'm going to say that you're an alcoholic or a prostitute. Those are not empty threats very often. They actually do that. And I always tell people there's a lovely poem. It's by Portia Nelson. Portia spelled Portia. And it's called There's a Hole in My Sidewalk. And it's one that therapists will be familiar with. But basically, I always tell people, get that poem, Google it, get it on your phone. And when you think you're going to be sucked back, read that poem. Just read it because it will keep you strong. Because essentially, you walk around. Instead of falling into the hole like you always have and taking them back, it teaches you that you've got to walk around that hole. And once you've walked around that hole, you can build a whole new path going in a completely different direction. But there's all these steps to it. But the first thing you have to do is just walk around that hole. Don't fall into the hole. And it's a really powerful, powerful metaphor. And I mean, I don't know how many people have been saved by that, just of my clients who've been saved by that, by having that poem ready to look at. But it's remarkable. So please do.
Yeah, we'll definitely have a look at that. I mean, you've gone through sort of quite a horrifying set of behaviours that somebody would be experiencing during the course of a relationship. We've then talked about hoovering, and the types of behaviours, which are, again, quite horrifying, I think, for a lot of people that may be listening, that people would actually be going through this at a point where they are trying to leave. So once they've left, I'm going to assume you're going to tell me now that these behaviours aren't going to get any better. They're going to get worse.
Yeah, they're going to stay the same or get worse. Yeah, with a real narcissist, which of course comes back to why we're always saying, listen, stop using the word in the wrong way. It's so important to understand that a real narcissist is going to do these things. With some narcissists, if they've got another partner, they won't be quite as bad because they're getting their narcissistic supply from someone else. So in some cases, they're not quite as bad. But in other cases, they seem to just sort of reserve those behaviours for you. They manage to keep them under the radar so their other partner doesn't find out. They still need you because you're their most reliable source of narcissistic supply. And they want to punish you for leaving. So, but the behaviours, and that's a key point actually, is that in relationship breakdown where it's just a kind of acrimonious breakdown, someone's done something that was horrible, they're a gambler or they're an alcoholic or they've had an affair or whatever, it's really hurt the other person and there's a lot of acrimony because of that, things calm down over time, because it's normal. That's kind of normal to behave badly at the beginning for some people, but they calm down as their kind of nervous system regulates and as they kind of get over it. That doesn't happen with narcissists.
And I guess that links to the sort of the length of the divorce proceedings you get into, which is something we talk about a lot, is they tend to be drawn out and costly because of it. And one of the characteristics of narcissistic divorces that I've been involved is they get to that point where normally most people will go, I've had enough now. Let's be sensible. Let's hit the limit. And that doesn't happen with narcissists. I mean, is that a fair thing to say?
Oh God, yeah. And it carries on post-separation, I'm afraid. So, as in it can carry on for years. And I had a case, she was 10 years post-divorce, and she came to me just in an absolute state. The narcissist was trying to do things with schools, basically, 10 years post-divorce, trying to get the children to go to schools it didn't need to go to, very, very expensive schools, so that she would have to pay because she actually was the financially stronger party. And this would have involved the children actually not seeing her because we're boarding schools that he was talking about. He wanted to not only reduce her time with the children, but also make her pay for it. And he was able to take this to court, and the judge at the moment taking it very seriously. What's in the best interest for the children? What do the children want? Kafka's person going, oh, yes, what do the children want? They seem to want to go to these posh boarding schools. Well, if you took me to a posh boarding school, even at my age, I'd go, oh, yeah, I would think, is there any, do you take people of my age at this school? So it's not really surprising, is it? That was 10 years post divorce. And there had been about 10, actually, there had been 10 court cases post-divorce, and the court orders have got tighter and tighter and tighter and better and better and better as this had progressed. But we managed to get rid of him. Basically, she represented herself, and we managed to get rid of him. And we've done that lots. We managed to do that with lots of, because we step outside of the normal system. We get people to where even if they're representing themselves, they will have a lawyer in the background very often giving them legal advice, but they're representing themselves technically. So that shows the narcissist, hang on, I'm not scared of you. So they may well be having legal advice in the background, but that's the point at which they stand up in court without a screen and they do their thing. And they show no fear, even though they're terrified. And that can often be the point at which the narcissist understands that they're not getting any supply from them anymore. Narcissists need to win. If they don't win.
Yeah. So hearing about, people who can get to that position, which is great. And obviously, we've gone through some of the things in terms of the information that people need to equip themselves with. Knowledge is power. Let's maybe have a look at some practical steps that people can take before the process, and thinking about things like, is there any therapies that people can undergo on their own? What about ground rules that you can set to live to your own ground rules for the ways that you're going to conduct the separation, so that you know that you're going to stick to the right lines? Have you got some tips for those?
Yeah, so starting with therapy, and I think I mentioned this last week as well, but just to say, do consider therapy if you need to, if you feel it's going to make you stronger. but make sure you're with the right therapist. There's no point having CBT, for example, which is often what's prescribed by the NHS. You may well have to pay privately for therapy, and that's an issue, obviously, if you're trying to kind of reduce because you're going to be paying a lot over the course of your divorce. So you need to think about the money side of things, but you really need a therapist who's trauma informed, preferably one who specializes in narcissistic abuse. That would be the gold standard, but someone at least who's trauma informed, perhaps someone who does EMDR. So look out for that, because if they do EMDR, they are trauma informed. And you want someone who 100% is registered by the correct organizations. So that's important as well, so that they're actually, a bona fide therapist.
So is that someone like the BACP? Is that you? Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. Alternatively, though, a divorce coach specialising in domestic abuse, that can be really useful, or in narcissistic abuse, because they get you to understand what's coming, and also, help you deal with your kind of trauma responses. Domestic abuse charities as well. They don't tend to like the word narcissism, although some recently I've been finding have been brilliant with it. That's not the norm, but I'm finding that some are being better. Women's Aid seem to be, there's one Women's Aid in the Midlands that seems to be using the word narcissism, and actually they've been providing therapy as well, free therapy through Women's Aid for narcissistic abuse. So I'm really pleased to see that. So those are kind of the places you can go to try to get yourself stronger. And obviously educating yourself is a big part of that as well. You've got to cognitively understand what you're dealing with. But yeah, you mentioned ground rules, Matthew, and ground rule number 1, don't tell the narcissist that they're a narcissist. Now, they might already know, because some really do, particularly the exhibitionist narcissist. They've been told already. They've been told at work. Someone's already said. But don't tell them. Don't tell them you know that they're a narcissist if you can possibly avoid it. It might be too late at this point, but the problem is that if you tell them they're a narcissist, they can turn that on you and say, well, no, actually, you're the narcissist. And then they can project their behaviours onto you without realising that they're doing that, because projection by definition is unconscious, or they'll throw some kind of mental illness at you. You've got bipolar or you're borderline. Don't go there. The other thing is, if you tell someone that they're a narcissist, they can go, yes, but so I can't help being like this. And so this is an illness. And so you need to love me more. And that feeds right back into the hoovering. So just don't go there. Don't tell their new partner if they have a new partner. And your instinct very often is you want to rush in and save this person. And I mean, God, I get it, but it's not your battle to fight. I'm afraid you've got to start. You've always put other people's needs in front of your own. That's what you do because you're a victim of narcissistic abuse. And I know a lot of people don't like that word victim, but at the moment, that's what this is. Don't put yourself last. Don't put a new partner who you don't even know in front of your own needs. So please, please, please don't tell their new partner. They're on their journey. Let them just be on that journey. You've got to protect yourself and your family now. If you tell their partner, you're going to be hauled into the police station for harassment because you are, they've told the new partner that you're abusive, that you're horrible, that you, blah, blah, blah. And that you're jealous of them, you're angry about them, and who knows what you might do. So they're already on high alert. So don't go there. Limit who you tell as well. Generally, keep it really, really close. Just tell your inner circle. If you want to mention that they're a narcissist, people aren't going to get it. They're just not going to get it, and they're going to say all the things that people say. Well, it takes two to tango, and have you thought about your role in this? And I don't think we should be labeling people, and you can't label someone because you're not a professional. On it goes. It's not worth it. Just tell your inner circle who are going to believe you and maybe go and look it up for themselves. That's all you need to do really with that. And don't use the word in court at the moment as well. Don't use the narcissism word in court, but do tell your lawyer. That's really important because your lawyer does need to know.
Just going to say, on that point of sort of, talking to your lawyer, if you like, one of the first things that we speak, whenever we're talking about divorce, etc., one of the first pieces of advice we give is that everybody should get advice right at the beginning, because you need to go into this informed as to what your options are, what your legal choices are, what's likely to happen. And often we talk about beauty parading, that people will go and they'll visit several different lawyers before deciding which lawyer is right for them. Somebody that's coming out of a narcissistic relationship, what should they be looking for when they're speaking to potential lawyers?
Yeah, and they are probably going to have to interview many to find the right one. I mean, they might be lucky and find one really early on, But firstly, they've got they are going to have to use the narcissist word. They're going to have to tell the lawyer what they've experienced and what the children have experienced, and they have to be really, really specific about what they've experienced. So I talk about those behaviours. And in the book, I've got the behaviours just listed. I'll go into great detail about them. But really looking at those behaviours, just taking the list of whatever it is, 30 odd behaviours, and running down them and then writing down the examples that have happened to you. And then taking those and saying, this is what's happened to me and the children, actually telling the lawyer about those is really, really important. They need to understand what you've been through, because you need to see what their reaction is to that and how seriously they take that. And of course, you've got to be slightly wary, because you talked about beauty parading. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of lawyers are jumping onto the kind of NPD bandwagon because it attracts clients, and there are targets to be met. And I'm not saying that all lawyers are terrible. I mean, I'm not saying that at all, but there are targets to be met. These are lucrative cases. I had a client once who he went to a lawyer, and the lawyer had written a blog post about NPD. And so he thought, this is brilliant, and this guy really is going to get this. £85,000 later, he was no further on, hadn't got anywhere at all, hadn't got to the first of either court proceedings. £85,000 had been spent. The lawyer had no real idea. I mean, they could quote and say, well, kind of entitled, and they exploit people, but they didn't understand how to actually manage a case. So you've got to be careful. Even the ones that are saying, oh yes, we understand what narcissism is, you've got to be careful. So you're going to have to test them. So there are specific things that you will want to know. So firstly, you're going to have to ask, what do you understand by the term narcissistic personality disorder? And if they say, oh, well, I don't believe in labelling people, everybody thinks their ex is a narcissist, or it's just another word for high conflict, or it makes no difference whether your partner's a narcissist in the divorce process, or we're all narcissistic, really. Or my particular favourite is, if I had a penny for every time someone told me that their spouse was a narcissist, be living on a desert island. Those things are just invalidating and not taking you seriously. Particularly if you sort of run through those lists of things that have happened to you, they're not getting it. They're not getting it. Move on. Find another person. And it also, even if they do say, oh yes, I do understand about narcissism, you want them to tell you what the specifics are of how narcissists behave in divorce. Because I mean, if I was to ask you guys, you'd say, oh, well, there's legal abuse and there's emotional abuse and there's financial abuse. You'd say those things, and you'd say how, But most people, because it's not taught, they're not trained, they're not going to know those specifics. So you're testing them. Another question is, how much experience do you actually have of dealing with narcissistic divorces? Because actually, if they tend to be the sort of lawyers who are very successful at settling out of court, so they manage to negotiate just with another lawyer or through mediation, if they're successful at that and they rarely go to court, probably they don't have the experience that you need, unfortunately, because unfortunately these types of cases mostly do end up in court. So because of the conflict, because the narcissist is stonewalling and just refusing to negotiate or changing the goalposts. So if they don't have much experience of court, if they go, no, I'm confident that we'll be able to sort this out just between lawyers, just think about that. I mean, they may not really know what it is that's going to hit them. The other thing that we mentioned briefly earlier is the idea that narcissists calm down over time and become more reasonable as the divorce progresses. That is a key indicator. So ask them whether they think narcissists calm down over time and whether they'll become more reasonable, because the answer, of course, is no. If they say, oh, yes, then again, move on, next one. Another one is, all the time I hear this, that lawyers will kind of invalidate their clients and say, no, of course he or she must love their children. They're their children. Of course they have their best interests at heart. You want to ask them specifically whether they think that, because narcissists don't have the best interests of the children at heart. So they'll be operating on this kind of premise that they'll calm down, and of course they have the best, and they'd never do that. And then they do it. And the lawyer's completely flummoxed because there's been a lot of time wasted, because they can't. How are you supposed to, if you haven't had experience of this, how you just would never know. You put your own morals onto other people, your own principles, and you think other people must be like you. And this is a whole different set of people with different rules. And if they haven't encountered it before, they're not going to understand. And another big one, because you're going to be in a bit of a mess, you're going to be in a state, you need a lawyer who's going to dive in and really help you with the stuff that maybe is easier for people who aren't going through narcissistic divorces. So writing witness statements, finding the evidence for the witness statements and put so that you've got them in your exhibits that go along with your statements, helping you to really put your financial disclosure together, because you might not be able to do things. You might be a mess. You might need really hands-on help. But often lawyers will just go, oh, we need this, here's a list, off you toddle, thank you very much. And actually, they're going to have to help you. Even if it's a junior that's helping, you just need someone, or you may need someone to help you through the process, unless you've got a friendly accountant friend or whatever that can help you with that. And that leads me on to the other thing, the financial disclosure. So when your partner's financial disclosure eventually arrives, it will be late. It will be incomplete, by the way. You need to know whether your lawyer is really going to get in there, dive in there and really go through their bank statements, for example, in detail, looking for discrepancies, looking for missing information. Or do they just sort of go, as I've seen a zillion times, here's your partner's financial disclosure. Let us know what you think of it. And it's, that's just impossible for someone there's a million things that are missing. And they're going through all the abuse with the children being used as weapons. All of this stuff is happening in the background. They're possibly being stalked or whatever. And to go, here you go, have a look at this and let us know what you think. Well, actually, the lawyer is going to have to roll up their sleeves and wade into the mud with them. And another question really is, are they willing to learn about NPD? If they don't already know about it deeply, and lots don't, so they've got to have a chance to learn about it. Are they willing to learn about it on their own time? So you shouldn't be sending them clips of things and them charging you to read it. They need really to be learning about it on their own time. And will they take on board what you're actually telling them about it? Because so often people go, well, this is going to happen, that's going to happen, I'm worried about this, I'm worried about that, and they're invalidated by their lawyer. No, that won't happen. And when it does, over time, the lawyer conspicuously stops arguing with them. But we're 2 years down the line at that point, and a lot of money's been spent, and we have a traumatized client.
I imagine that one of the problems for clients who've experienced narcissistic abuse is, and we've talked about this before, is they become kind of people pleasers. And you referenced it early, putting other people's needs above their own. So I think it's quite intimidating for clients seeing a lawyer anyway, even if you're not dealing with this. And if you walk into, or Teams or whatever, a lawyer who says, yeah, here's the case, this is roughly it, blah, 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 yeah, I know what I'm talking about, because we're all used to doing this, and most people can sort of sell themselves in the first meeting, then there's probably a degree of someone, especially who is used to people pleasing, going, oh, okay, well, I don't want to offend them by going to see someone else. I don't want to say no because they know what they're talking about. I didn't know what they're talking about, and they seemed all right, so I'm going to trust them. I mean, I always say to clients at the end of the first meeting, go speak to someone else and come back to me. Whether they do or not is a different matter, but I'll always say that because I think it's the right thing to say. But I think for someone who has suffered narcissistic abuse to then kind of be able to stand up and say, I'm not sure that I'm impressed with you, lawyer, who's been practicing this for 25 years and has done a gazillion cases because of some of the stuff you say, that must be quite challenging for them.
It is. I mean, it is. And that's why I sort of say that you need to understand that, you really need to stand in your power and try and get prepared for this, which is why just going, okay, they're a narcissist, I'm pressing the button on their divorce. No, that might not be the right thing for you. You might need to stand back and really build your strength up, build your knowledge and understanding up, and actually understand that you've got to, what's gone on for you, the fact that you're a people pleaser, the fact that you're a rescuer, the fact that you give and give and give, and the narcissist takes and takes and takes, the fact that you put all your needs last, you're right at the back of the pile, the fact that you're a people pleaser and you don't want to offend people, all of those things, you need to look at yourself. It's such a difficult thing. You need to remind yourself, no, I've got to do this. And that's so often people can't do it for themselves, but they can do it for their children.
I think clients need to understand that and be prepared to say that they can, not everyone's a specialist in everything. But if you were doing an extension on your house, if it's someone that dealt with conservatory, you wouldn't get them to do your loft, and vice versa. If someone comes to me and asks me to do an adoption case, I'm going to say I don't have a clue, speak to one of my colleagues. But if someone comes to me about an narcissistic case, I say, okay, well, here's what I do, and here's how I've done them. Now, not everyone does those cases, and that's fine. But it's absolutely fine. Clients say, well, they don't do that, so maybe they're more of a loft person. I need a conservatory person. I think giving clients the sort of power to do that, to say thanks but no thanks, is really important and it's entirely legitimate.
Yeah, but as you say, a lot of people aren't going to do that. And actually, a lot of lawyers are going to, even worse, and I hear this all the time, people who've been victims of narcissistic relationships tend to say he may be more of a loft person than a conservatory person, but he wants to be a conservatory person, and more people need to become conservatory people. So in doing my case, they'll get to understand about how to build a conservatory, and that will be really useful for other people who need conservatories. And literally, that's how far back they put their own needs. This will be good for the lawyer to learn about narcissism so that other people can benefit from that. That's very common. And again, I go into this actually in the book, because the second book, From Leaving to Liberty, and actually when to sack your lawyer and change lawyers, and why you might be really resistant to doing it. If the case hasn't been going very well at all, you are going to have to change lawyers. And it happens a lot in these cases, unfortunately, because of those things, because you've fallen for it and you've wanted to give them a chance. I want to give this young lawyer that hasn't had much experience, because that's what people who fall into these relationships are very often like. So it's really important to understand that about yourself. Go, okay, I have to actively do something that doesn't feel comfortable. I'm going to have to be someone that I'm not yet. I'm going to have to fake it until I make it. But I'm going to have to become someone else for now to protect myself and the family. And the other thing with this is, you might think, well, okay, I've got it. It's easy. I'm just going to go for a senior lawyer because they're really experienced. But they might be so stuck in their ways that they might not be effective. And you might go for a really junior lawyer because thinking, well, they're more kind of creative and they're younger and they understand. They're just down with the lingo. They know what gaslighting is, all of that stuff. But they might find themselves really overwhelmed by everything that's coming their way and not actually be able to. And then if they're not getting support from their firm, for example, they might find it difficult to be honest about it with you. So it's really hard. It might be that a junior lawyer is actually better for your case than a senior lawyer, or vice versa. It's down to the individual lawyer, really. Are they a loft person? Are they a conservatory person? I mean, that's a pretty good analogy, to be honest.
I mean, that's why we teamwork here at Stowe, so that you get a mix of people. But it was interesting about the sort of changing lawyers halfway through. And absolutely, for some people, they have to. I think, just to emphasise, though, doing your due diligence at the beginning is far more beneficial, because if you're looking to change because you haven't found that right fit at the beginning, or you've given somebody a chance that hasn't quite worked out the way that you wanted it to, there is going to be a degree of extra cost then in changing lawyers, because particularly if you're 12, 18 months through a complicated court case and you're then looking to change lawyers, your new lawyer is then going to have to do a lot of reading into your case. That's going to take a significant amount of time, and there are going to be additional costs there. So just a slight word of warning, if you like, that it is much better, even if you have to talk to 10 people at the beginning, it's much better to do that real due diligence first than need to change halfway through.
But yeah, and to give you an idea of this, I had a client recently who's 6 years post-divorce, going through hell, has had the same lawyer, solicitor and barrister for the entire time, and looked into changing, had to give 6 years of bundles and letters and all of that stuff over to a new potential lawyers. It cost £20,000 just to look at the information. And that was 6 years post-divorce. But so there is definitely a level of a huge level of cost associated with that. And so yes, of course, it's better to get it sorted earlier, get the right person in. But equally, if you don't want to be throwing good money after bad, basically. So if you have to change, you do have to change.
So talking about money, then I guess that brings us on to the sort of financial info that we need to that people need to get ready. So, I mean, in some ways, the actual bricks and mortar of what people need to do, and what they need to provide, there's a lot of commonalities. We've talked before on the podcast plenty of times about doing the Form E, about the documents that are required. But I guess there's some additional stuff in a narcissistic divorce that might be useful in terms of countering maybe slightly predictable or kind of common arguments that a narcissist will throw at you or try and argue. I mean, I don't know if we need to go into huge detail about bank statements and that sort of things, providing that, like I say, there's plenty of episodes in the feed where we've done a guide to financial disclosure and Form Z that people can listen to. But maybe let's touch on some of the specific things, Supriya, that you see in terms of arguments that narcissists will deploy, where it might be advantageous to have done your research beforehand to kind of counter these arguments. Things like ability to work in the future kind of springs to mind.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and so really what we're talking about here is talking obviously about preparing to leave. So one of the things I want to say is that really you need to have seen the financial disclosure because they're not going to give you their financial disclosure officially. Their For Me is not going to be complete, and it's going to be late, it's going to be incomplete, and they're going to be hiding things basically. So if you are already aware of that before you actually leave them, I'm sure the lawyers are going to be not very happy with. So we'll have to talk about that in a second, but you need to find evidence of everything basically. You need to find, so you get their all the things you need, the credit card statements, the bank accounts, the tax returns, their job contract. You mentioned ability to work. If they've get their CV, if they've applied recently for a job, you need evidence of that, because if they say, oh no, I can't work anymore, I was always planning on retiring, which is a classic. If they applied for a job 3 months earlier for £1 zillion a year, that's evidence that actually that's not really what they've been thinking. There's an awful lot that they're going to not give. They're going to pretend that stuff that they own, for example, is not worth anything, but the stuff that you own is worth loads of money. Can you get the receipts for the stuff that they own, that they've bought recently? There's so much to get. Might they be hiding money in a PayPal account? Have you got things like their insurance? So if they're saying that if they've got vehicles or jewelry or art or something like that, expensive things that they're saying aren't worth much, have you got the insurance documents? Could you find the insurance documents for those? There's an awful lot to get hold of, possibly sneakily. And you might not be able to use all of that in court. And I was wondering if you guys could sort of explain the whole Imerman thing and how there's a bit of an issue with using information that you've obtained without their knowledge. Could you explain that?
Yeah. So Imerman was a case from quite a while ago now, probably about 2008, maybe 2009. Cengiz and Imerman is the full title. And basically what that case established was a right to sort of privacy of information. Effectively, it set out the rules for when you can access information and documents belonging to your spouse and when you can't. And it's quite restrictive. Effectively, what it says is that if there is a legitimate expectation of privacy, you can't access these documents. So I think in that case, from memory, there were documents in a safe, and the safe was unlocked and accessed by the accessing party, and then were produced in proceedings as evidence of non-disclosure by the party whose those documents were. And the court said, you can't really do that because, there is an expectation of privacy over documents that are yours and yours alone. And why should the family court operate under different rules from other arenas? So it then produced this slightly, I'm choosing my words carefully, slightly creative, not hugely logical approach where if you have knowledge of your spouse's financial means, you can't provide documents without having previously sent them sealed if you provide them to your lawyer. So if I get given a document by my client and it's, here's a document and it's my husband's document and I don't look at it on the table, I'm not allowed to look at it, and I say, where did you get this? And they say, oh yeah, so it was in a locked filing cabinet and I opened the lock and I got it in and I pulled it out. And what this shows is he's got a secret bank account in Switzerland. And they go, right, I can't see that. What we need to do is we need to put it in an envelope and we need to send it to the other side and they need to review it. And then if they think it's disclosable, they need to disclose it back to us. And we can't copy it. Any copies must be destroyed. And my client can't keep any copies, but they can rely on their memory of that document and by asking a question later and saying, do you have an account in Switzerland? So it is ludicrous. I'm going to not pick my words carefully. It's a ludicrous state of affairs, and I struggle personally with the idea that the assets themselves can be matrimonial, but the documentation concerning those assets are not matrimonial. So it's bizarre, quite frankly. But there we go. So when you say access documents sneakily, both me and Lisa do a giant and kind of say, there might be consequences to this. And I do think it is a bit of a non-disclosures charter, and I do think it feeds into economic abuse, and I think it's something that the court should look at. But as the law stands, my advice to clients is always going to be, if there are documents with a reasonable expectation of privacy, and if they're left on the kitchen table in full view, you're entitled to them. If they're in a shared bills folder that you use, you're entitled to them because there's an expectation that you can access. If they are password protected on the computer, it's different. If they are in a locked filing cabinet, it's different. And you can't access those. And you certainly can't provide them to us. And we certainly can't use them without having just sent them unseen to the other side. So it's a tricky area, because there are cases where, bluntly, the only way of knowing about the existence of these things is to, access them illicitly. That puts you in trouble, but maybe there's a two wrongs doesn't make a right principle here. But if that's the only way of accessing the information that betrays some non-disclosure, then I can understand why clients might want to get there, and I can understand why you're saying to clients they might want to consider that. Is that delicate enough, Lisa? Have I got myself into any trouble by saying that? You've never been so quiet.
No. I was just going to let you dig yourself a hole there.
I could tell. Unfortunately, I was all too willing to pick up the shovel. But it is a really tricky area, and it's something that clients got to be really careful about. It's something that lawyers have got to be really careful about and got to be uber cautious about, because we can't condone behaviour that is something that would be frowned upon by the court. We're officers of the court, so those are the rules. It does create some practical difficulties.
I think there's some practical things that clients can still do, though. So, for example, if there's a conversation where a particular bank account is mentioned, like keep a note, open a notes app on your phone, and whenever something is mentioned, write it down, so that when you get the financial information from the other side, you can suddenly think, oh, actually, I'm sure he mentioned a Santander bank account, which isn't in here. We can then raise that as a question within the questionnaire. It's really hard to remember things, obviously, over a long period of time, particularly if it is just, I don't know, seeing a letter come in. You can't open that letter, but if that letter has Barclays written all across the front of it, of the envelope, again, write that down. Barclays, let's have a look. Let's see if anything's disclosed from Barclays. If not, it's a question that we can ask. So there are still other things that can be done as well. So keeping sort of a detailed record can be really helpful.
And just taking a further step, if there's then, you ask the question, do you have a Barclays account? And the lying liar on the other side lies and says, no, I don't, because I'm a liar. If you've got a really strong recollection of that and you can back it up, you can apply for what's called third-party disclosure orders, and you can make an order against the bank to disclose what accounts are held by the other party. And if they object to that application, then it's kind of, well, why are you objecting to this? Because if you don't have any accounts with Barclays, then you're not going to mind if we make a request to Barclays, are they? So, they are complicated and expensive and more time consuming, and there's no guarantee of success, but there is stuff that you can do relying on your own memory. I think that taking notes point's a really, really good practical tip.
So what about if you were to take a photo of that envelope with Barclays written on it? You could do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Take a picture of the envelope. You just can't open it, but take a picture of it. And then if he says, I haven't got I'm using stereotypes here. If he says he hasn't got a Barclays account, you send them the photo and say, well, can you explain why you're receiving
it's about the underlying documentation. It's not about your recollection of the documents, but you can take photos of stuff if it's freely accessible. If it's in an envelope on the doormat, it's accessible. If it's in a locked cabinet, it's not. So it's expectation of privacy at the stage at which you've become privy to the knowledge of that document. So, I mean, that's a kind of a tricky point and something that can be a bit difficult to get around. Maybe, hopefully slightly easier from a practical perspective. Obviously, there'll be lots of joint, not necessarily, but there will often be a lot of joint accounts, joint credit cards, mortgages, whatever. What protections, Supriya, do you think are useful to put in place for people who are having to deal with, we've got a joint bank account and I'm pretty sure my spouse is just going to lift it all out and put it in their sole bank account, which is a really common thing.
Yeah, I mean, it really, really is. I mean, that's just so common. And I wonder what, obviously it depends, I think, on the provider as to what you can do. But I think you need to be making inquiries about what you can do. So say if you've got joint credit cards, find out from them, can you come off it? Does it have to be in their name or your name for you to be able to come off it? What are the rules? Find out what happens there, because they can run up debt on a joint credit card and you'll be liable for it, just as liable as them. Or find out what the rules are. Joint bank accounts, I mean, that's the biggie is if you've got an interest-only mortgage, and you've got an offset account that goes with that. So you're building money up that if you had a repayment mortgage, you'd be paying it monthly and paying off the mortgage, but you're just paying the interest instead. So you're building up capital in an offset mortgage account, which offsets against the interest that you'd be paying, basically. So in other words, you might have a lot of money in that offset account. That's a joint account, or even if it's held in their name, that can just be taken. They can just take that, even if it's jointly held, and put it into their own account, and you won't see it again. So again, contacting your mortgage provider and saying, well, what can I do about this? I'm thinking of separating. What are the rules? I think that's really important. I mean, in certain cases, they might say, well, once you let us know, we can require that there are 2 signatures required for each transaction from that account. So that's quite an important one. I mean, what do you suggest on that? Have you got any other suggestions with the joint accounts?
I think the 2 signatory one's really good. I think if you are sure that your spouse is about to take all the money, or they've done it in another account, then it's sometimes sensible, and you've got to be careful about the way you do it, but it's sometimes sensible to take half the balance. If it's a savings account that's not going to affect the payment of interest, if it's not to pay the bills, then if there's 20 grand in an account, then taking 10 grand and saying the other 10's for you to do with what you want is fine. Now, that will often provoke a response from the other side, which is, this is absolutely outrageous. You're taking money without consent. Your client gets painted as whatever. But if you can rise above that and you just say, it was a joint account, we're entitled to take half of it, we've taken our half of it, and you're having the other half, I struggle to see there's much legitimate comeback from that, especially if there's been a history of previously the other party doing it, of mortgages not being paid, of child maintenance not being paid. If someone has no savings and someone else and the other party in their sole name has lots of savings, that's a legitimate response. So that's something that can be done in the right circumstances. I normally put the other side on notice first that we're going to do it, rather than just doing it. Lisa, what have you got?
I think with a narcissist, probably putting them on notice that you're going to do it.
Well, I mean, I would say that it's been done like half an hour ago. Just, to flag that it has happened, not to allow them to do it.
Yeah.
Right. So that they know before they look at the account.
Yeah. So they say, by the way, we've done it, and here's why we've done it, and giving the justification before they can launch into a "why have you done this" response. So there's a timing piece there, I think. Lisa, have you got any sort of specific joint account tips?
Yeah, I had a poor client this last week where £1 million was swiped out of the joint account into a sole account. Painful. So yeah, it definitely happens. I think one of the biggest concerns is not so. Yes, with savings accounts, you can absolutely deal with those with joint signatories or removing 50%. I think it becomes more problematic when we're looking at a current account that is potentially connected to all of the household bills, utilities, food, mortgages, etc. Particularly if the other person is a high earner or the main breadwinner and it's their salary that goes into that account, because it may be that they suddenly just stop paying their salary into that account. And, we've done podcasts previously as to what you can do in these sorts of circumstances. But I think where we're looking here about preparing for leaving, I think one of the things you need to do is think, right, okay, actually, if there wasn't money going into that account, how could I get those bills paid for at least a couple of months whilst we're sorting out any litigation loans or LSPO orders, or things to help get that interim maintenance, things to help get that sorted. Is there anything practically that you can do? And that might be actually, from a practical perspective, I'm going to use the savings account to ensure that those bills are paid. That's why I'm safeguarding that money so that those household bills can be paid. But having a think about that, if the other person were to direct their salary elsewhere, what's going to happen?
And putting the mortgage company on notice is really important. They're generally pretty understanding. And if you say, all mortgage companies have to have a department that deals with people who are in financial difficulties, all have to now have awareness of economic abuse, and it's sketchy from bank to bank in my experience, but some can be really good. If you flag that there's going to be an issue that suddenly the joint account is not having monies paid into it, then firstly, you can, by putting them on notice and it not being a surprise, they can put a note on your account. If a payment is made within the same calendar month, I think, as the mortgage payment, there's no impact on credit rating. You might want to look at a mortgage holiday for a couple of months. Now, that will normally require consent of both, and doubtless a narcissist will say no, but that's something else that you can consider in terms of just kind of managing the expectations. So speaking to a mortgage company beforehand, and if you're doing the planning, the preparing, saying, I'm a bit concerned that this might happen. It's okay at the moment. What might happen? What would you do if X, Y, and Z? And I consider that I could be an abuse victim. That's something that they'll normally speak to you about, and they've got a specialist team who will do it. And it's better to do it than just get a call from them going, you didn't pay your mortgage this month, you're in arrears. So that's something to potentially flag, I think. I mean, something else that can be often joint, but frequently sole, and can be a way that a narcissist can maintain control and make attacks and snoop in things, is sort of cybersecurity. And obviously it's linked with finances a lot, with online banking, and people having access to the same accounts. I mean, I think it's a fascinating topic. We have done an episode before, which is in the feed, about cybersecurity and how that can be, which is slightly terrifying in the way that tech devices can be used for cyber abuse. That's something presumably that applies in narcissistic divorces. And how would you advise clients to deal with that?
Massively, yeah, absolutely massive. So with the finances, of course, change all your passwords, your bank savings accounts, online credit card statements, different passwords for each one. Even often you've got a different password if you've got the banking app on your phone. So again, change that. Obviously, you don't want to do it too far in advance, because if they have no clue that you're going to be leaving them, this might be something you want to do later on, but you need to know how to do it. So it's something that you want to have on your list. And also, can they track your spending, or can they access your accounts in other ways? And I had a case fairly recently where a client got herself a new credit card because she was trying to look to prevent her ex-husband from tracking her spending. And in court documentation, he was able to produce screenshots of her purchases in court documentation. And what he'd been able to do is use her Apple Wallet. Somehow he'd been able to get to access the new credit card, which he wasn't even supposed to know about, on his own phone via her Apple Wallet, because he had her Apple ID and password. And somehow he'd managed to circumvent the other security measures. So, I mean, they were actually sort of real-time examples of her spending, screenshots from her Apple Wallet appearing in court documentation. You talked about Imerman earlier. No one seemed to bat an eyelid. About perhaps it wasn't because she'd physically unlocked a drawer and taken it, but no one batted an eyelid about that. And I thought that should definitely come under Imerman. But there we are. Such is the law.
Yeah, that seems an unauthorised access to data with a reasonable expectation of privacy.
Well, was it on his phone, though? Did you say he was able to access it via his phone?
Yeah.
Is that on the assumption that previously he would have had a password or been given access to her Apple?
Well, yeah, probably, yeah.
So there's some sort of password there that hasn't been changed, and there's a lot. Yeah, just goes to show how many layers there are, though, isn't it? Like, you assume if you just change one password, that's enough, but actually, there's often so many different layers, and all of our tech is connected in some respect, which means that if you just forget to change one, actually, you potentially still open everything up to the other person.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, so in general, so we're talking about sort of Apple IDs with that one, but it's amazing if your partner knows your Apple ID and your password, they could do all sorts of things remotely. So depending on how you've enabled things, so you can store lots of different bits of information on iCloud, and so you can enable things to be stored on iCloud, basically. So if you haven't really worked out what you've done and you've just kind of enabled loads of things, your partner, if they know your Apple ID and password, could access your emails, all your contact lists with all their contact information, your photos, your iMessages, your texts. They could access all of that from your iCloud. They can even send messages as you using your Apple ID. So then they can actually send false incriminating messages to themselves from you and go, look what he or she did. They said they were going to do X, Y, and Z. They said they were going to burn the house down or whatever. You can actually do that. They can actually do that if they've got your Apple ID and password. If they can log onto your iCloud, then they'll be able to track your movements. If you've got the Find My Phone on an iPhone, if they've got that feature, and they can even actually wipe your iPhone remotely, because that's supposed to be a protective feature for if your iPhone you lose it, you can access iCloud and wipe it. But of course, a partner could do that. So one of the really easy ways of getting rid of that is to enable two-factor authentication. So basically, that's when your verification code is sent to your iPhone or your iPad. And that should make it impossible for them to log in using your Apple ID and password, unless, of course, they've got access to that iPad or phone, which has been set up to get the verification code. So that's one thing to think about.
All I've been able to think through this, by the way, is that I don't even know what my own Apple ID is or my own password. I mean, which shows that, like, I'm sure it would be very easy for anyone to get mine. I wouldn't have a clue.
I was looking at it earlier, Matthew, and I think you need to cut back on the takeaways.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt, entirely fair. That's a public service. If you've hacked into my Apple ID to do that, I will take that on the chin. But that's obviously really common, and sort of Apple devices and stuff, and slightly scary. I guess there's sort of more old school methods in terms of backing up documents. I'm showing my age here. I'm almost about to start talking about floppy disks, but external hard drives, things like that, and retention of data, especially when you've got to give disclosure to stop your partner from destroying that data.
Yeah, which they do. I had a client who recently had her information completely destroyed, as well as all her financial information, as well as his. I mean, what a brilliant way to cause chaos. She didn't know what she had. It just made everything a million times more difficult. And she was in a really, it's a very trying time for her. So emotionally, she wasn't in a good way. So this just made everything so much worse. So yeah, backing up your computer with an external hard drive and then hiding that from them to prevent issues if your computer's wiped, that's going to be a sensible thing to do. And of course, changing all your other passwords, the computer password, the phone password, tablets, Amazon. I mean, this is, you just don't think, do you? I must change my Amazon password. But actually, I've got a great couple of examples to show why this is quite important. So I had a client whose husband had been making false allegations against his wife, saying that she was an alcoholic and a drug abuser. And so the court had ordered that she had hair strand testing, in fact, that they both had hair strand testing, which basically looks for the presence of drugs and alcohol. And it can show what's been taken in the past, basically, what drugs and alcohol have been taken in the past. And he knew, of course, that these allegations were false. So what he decided, so that her hair strand test would come back negative. So he decided to discredit the test results. He Googled it. He worked out that the test results can be less reliable in the presence of hair dyeing. So if you've repeatedly dyed your hair, that can reduce the presence of drugs and alcohol in the hair. So he went onto his wife's Amazon account and ordered specialized hair dyeing kits, specifically to reduce the amount of drugs in, and they exist apparently, to reduce the amount of drugs in the hair, and also drug testing kits as well. So I think it was a cocaine testing kit. I don't know whether it was a urine testing kit. I'm not sure what it was, but drug testing kits. And he had ordered those from her account, had them arranged to be sent to her address, took screenshots of them, which he used in court, to allege that her hair strand test hadn't been accurate, but cancelled the orders as soon as he'd taken the screenshots, so that they never got to her, so she wasn't alerted to the fact that he'd done this. So that all turned up in court. And I had another one using Amazon where there was a narcissistic wife. She accessed his Amazon account to see what he was ordering, and she found his orders of books about NPD, including mine. And basically, I found that she was looking me up on LinkedIn and various other places, but she framed this to the court as him being obsessed with trying to call her mad. And she claimed that he'd been gaslighting her, telling her that she was mad for years, and that these books actually were evidence of him being.
Did you get a 5-star Amazon review out of it though?
No, I didn't.
Oh, shame. But it just goes to show the lengths that people will go to. It's and the sort of, sounds like I'm praising it. I'm not, but the creative approaches that people will make when they are so hell bent on winning, getting narcissistic supply, annihilation, all those things that we talk about.
And it comes back to how they're wired to be manipulative, and how easy it is. I mean, I would never think of that. Oh, wow, Amazon, I'm going to do that. You'd never think of it on a million years. But narcissists are wired to be manipulative. And so they're just going to, it's just going to trip off. That's why they've got such massive advantages over people who aren't narcissists. And the other thing to say, obviously a new email, setting up a new email that they know nothing about for all your divorce-related correspondence, because it's just going to be safer that way. And you were talking about encrypted emails. And I think you were saying that on the podcast episode that you did with Refuge, and that the tech safety podcast, that they talked about encrypted emails and things you could do to prevent your email from being accessed by them at all. So I think it's probably worth mentioning that, and people should go and have a look at that. If they're going to set up a new email, which they should do, get one that can't be hacked into, basically. And what do you do if you haven't got that much money and you share a computer with your spouse? I mean, what do you do? I don't even know. You know, obviously, can you get a cheap tablet or a separate computer? Can you get a pay-as-you-go phone just to put that email on your divorce-related correspondence and emails?
I think as a minimum, what people should be doing there, and this is probably about the extent of my technology, is normally you can set up separate profiles on the same computer, and you can have your profile being password protected. Now, doubtless there are ways around that, but if you can have your own password and your own profile where you do your own stuff on there, and you remove, any stuff, from technical phrase stuff here, obviously, any data from the sort of share profile, that's going to be a start. Now, I'm sure that the narcissist will say, well, how dare you, you're now doing secretive stuff on your profile, but that's probably something you've got to live with to a degree.
Yeah, and that's going to alert them, isn't it? If you suddenly have your own password, it's going to alert them that, why, what are you hiding from me?
Yeah, so maybe one of the later things to do in terms of preparing to go.
Yeah.
Something that comes up a lot in proceedings, and I think most family lawyers kind of hate this, but is the use of previous communications, lots of WhatsApps, text messages, that sort of thing, emails. Often they're not as useful as clients think they are, actually, and often you can drown in WhatsApps and they don't really point out what you want. But sometimes they can be really key to proving something, especially in children cases, don't often make a difference in financial cases. So I guess saving those is something that's useful, exporting WhatsApp chats.
Yeah, definitely exporting WhatsApp chats. Definitely, you can take screenshots of texts or other types of message. Voicemails as well, left by your partner, especially during just to know how to do it at this point. Well, actually, it might be worth doing because, if they promised you something, for example, if you leave them, they'll do X, Y, and Z, or if there are any incriminating ones, you can export those as well. So, and that's, we've had some recent ones where this was during the divorce where the narcissist sort of rang up and left the most bizarre messages, sort of saying, well, thank you so much for giving us all this money, helping out with the children and blah, 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 blah. And then within the same conversation, you need to give us more money and you need to leave us alone because you're the father and you shouldn't have anything to do with them because leave me to do everything. And I didn't have to work during the marriage. So I'm never going to work again. And it was all there in a voicemail. So that was very useful for court. I've had some great ones where WhatsApps have been incredibly useful. I had a narcissistic mother who was alienating the children from the husband, and she was saying that he'd never had anything to do with the children. When they were babies, he didn't have anything to do with them. He wasn't safe to be left with the children on their own, and he doesn't know how to parent and all of this. Well, the WhatsApps were brilliant because they showed that she'd be saying, oh, you're coming home to do bath time. And how much did the child have? How much milk did they have? Did they have a sleep? And I've got to go now for a week. So thank you so much for looking after them for this week. How did you get on? What did they eat? And all of this. And it was sort of this conversation we had a couple of years of him being just as much of a parent, if not more, actually, in many ways than she was. And it was very, very clear in those WhatsApps that he was completely involved in looking after those children. That was really useful.
The only thing to bear in mind with WhatsApp messages these days is that they can be edited fairly shortly afterwards. So it's possible to sort of send the message and then within a minute edit it to something else. So actually you see the original one and then it's gone. So yeah, you can export chats, but sometimes actually if a message comes through and that is particularly aggressive or is showing their true colours, if you like, just screenshotting that straight away before they've got the opportunity to edit it.
Yeah, and I suppose that's when. So at the moment we're doing a stealth how to kind of prepare for leaving them. So hopefully they're still sort of behaving themselves a bit at this point, but certainly when they realise that you're leaving, then that's going to be really, really important. But I'm thinking just before, because they can delete messages, of course, retrospectively as well. So they can delete all their responses all the way through your WhatsApp conversations, for example. So that's why I'm saying get the previous ones that show things like, I was an involved parent, or they're the ones that take drugs. I've had that as well with someone saying he's a drug taker. And actually, there's clear evidence that I'm going to go and buy some cocaine now. Kind of just unbelievable evidence really on WhatsApp. It was all downloaded. So certainly you might say, well, yes, that could have been edited, or it could have, because you can doctor WhatsApp messages. And that's why it's things like we try to use things like Our Family Wizard and caught when communicating. But that's again during the divorce process, because they can't be retrospectively edited. But it still puts doubt, doesn't it, into the minds of the judge, or still gives a flavour. So it's worth doing. It's 100% worth doing. So exporting those chats and getting evidence, 100%, I think.
So I guess, I mean, maybe the final thing that sort of leaps to mind that you might want to take care of is actual physical stuff, sentimental items, because if you can rest assured, can't you, that if you are representing a client who has a sentimental attachment to something in the family home, the narcissist is going to do all that they can to take/destroy that item, aren't they?
Always.
So I guess removing stuff to safe places, whether it's storage or your parents' house or whatever, and just protecting those things,
Yeah, and again, this is with its family photos that are the one that just happen all the time. So if the narcissist happens to be the kind of tech savvy person, and they're storing all the photos online on Flickr or some kind of cloud storage, they will remove your access to those photos. So you will not have your children's baby photos at all. That's just an absolute classic. And so you'll need to find a way of getting those and doing whatever you need to do to get your own storage system for them, downloading them and getting them, but find a way to get hold of those, because it just causes untold it's just more emotional abuse. And again, it distracts you from the important business of how you're going to kind of conduct the divorce. So you need to make sure that they can't, if you're handing them a weapon, if you know that's a weapon, take it away from them basically by having copies made. And it's the same with physical photos or old videos, transfer them to a digital format if you can, or like you say, remove them, take them to your parents' house or a friend's house, or take them to work and lock them in a cupboard at work or whatever. Children's art, that's another one. The narcissist wouldn't care about the kind of picture that your child did when they were 3 of you with "I love you, mummy." But they'll take it and they'll destroy it, or they'll say they want it, and it'll be something to argue about. So either remove it from the house or get a photo of it, so that at least you've got something to remember it by, because these are ways that they'll emotionally hijack you. And the same with physical items. Obviously, you need to be able to keep all your stuff, your divorce-related stuff, safe. So how are you going to do that? Will you get a safe and work out what you're going to do to keep stuff in the house, or are you going to keep stuff at work again? Are you going to have a lock on your bedroom door when you separate, so that they can't come in and rifle through your stuff? How are you going to do that? You've got to plan all these things. Who's going to do it? How are you going to do it? When are you going to get that set up? Where are you going to keep your laptop, your tablet, your phone? Are you going to have, if you've got a sort of a burner phone essentially with your lawyer, you're going to keep that at work, or how are you going to keep them from even knowing that it exists? So that's another thing. Jewelry, that sort of thing, items of sentimental value. Can you have a safe deposit box, maybe with a bank, to put that kind of stuff in? There's all sorts of things you're going to have to think about. And if you know what they're going to want to sort of take, or what they're going to try and hurt you with, think about those things and just remove them, get them out of the equation as far as you can. But I just wanted to talk, when we're talking about the cyber side of things, I do want to talk about, if I may, just about internet connected speakers and monitors, because this is huge. I mean, this is so big, and I literally see this all the time. So your CCTV or your nanny cam or your internet connected doorbell or your Alexa or Google Assistant or your baby monitor, if it's internet connected, they will use that to listen in on you, to record you. They will do that. They will change the password to it if you haven't. So you need to know what the passwords are, and they will mess around. They will change things so that if they move out, they will still be able to monitor you. They'll know who's coming and going from your house. They'll even know what deliveries you're having, and they'll know who's visiting. They'll be able to hear you looking after the baby if the baby monitor is in your room. I mean, it's really awful, and you just possibly don't know how intrusive these things can be. So really think about that, because I have seen some horrendous things. Even cars, if you've got a tracking device on your car, like an official one, so that if your car gets stolen, you've got a tracking. There are apps that can be set up to go along with that. And if your partner has the app that goes along with that, they can tell how many people are in the car, they can track the car, they can even turn the car off. from their phone, from the app. So again, what's going on there? Is there an app connected to your tracker? And if so, are you on it? Can you have the password to that? There are lots and lots of things to consider. And I mean, it's just so common. These things are so common.
Scary stuff.
Yeah, it's frightening.
You know, there's lots of food for thought there for people who are sort of preparing to leave. I think maybe what's best to do is to sum up in our traditional way, which you're going to be more than used to, Supriya, is sort of, if we can circle back and give your sort of top tips. So if someone's preparing to leave a narcissist, what are the most important things for them to consider and start doing before they actually decide to separate?
I think the paperwork is a big one. That's probably the first thing. I mean, firstly, get themselves into a mental state where they can actually do all of this, because this is a heck of a lot to ask of anybody. Just a person who's completely firing on all cylinders is going to find all of it. What we've just gone through, that's a lot. Try to get themselves into the emotional state where they can actually do this, and maybe enlist someone to help them, someone they trust to actually help them do this. That would be a top tip. Don't tell the narcissist they're a narcissist. That's a definite top tip. Keep that, close to your chest. Getting in touch with the banks, I think, is a really important one, just so that you're prepared for those things. And the cybersecurity, honestly, find out about your Apple ID. That's probably the biggest issue that people have for being tracked. And I think probably those are really the kind of major ones, because we've gone through everything in such detail. And also, actually, do download your messages, because I've seen that being so useful, using those messages. You might sort of think things are relevant that aren't, and it may be that your lawyer has to go through and really dig out the gold.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us again. So that's it for this episode of Stowe Talks. Thanks for listening. If you are at any immediate risk of domestic abuse, please call the police or the National Domestic Abuse Helpline on 0808 2000 247. You can find out more about all the work that Supriya does at www.thelifedoctor.org. Her latest book, Narcissists in Divorce, From Love Locked to Leaving, is available from Amazon as an audiobook, on Kindle, or as a paperback. The second book in the Narcissists in Divorce series, From Leaving to Liberty, will be out in the late summer. The Narcissist Trap, The Mind-Bending Pull of the Great Pretenders, is also available to buy on Amazon. Her podcast, Narcissists in Divorce, is one of the world's top 5% most downloaded podcasts. She has a range of online courses on narcissism at drsupriya.com, and blog posts and more information about the work she does can be found at thelifedoctor.org. She also posts insights on LinkedIn, Twitter and Instagram. If you would like more information on our podcast, head over to stowtalks.co.uk and please rate, like, share and review this podcast where you can.